The taxi pulled up to the old colonial house in the heart of Valencia. Elena took a deep breath before getting out, observing the time-worn yellow facade, the pots of geraniums her mother always kept on the balcony, and the old carved wooden door she had seen so many times in her memories over the past 15 years. "Need a hand with your bags, miss?" the taxi driver asked as he took the luggage from the trunk. "No, thank you. I can manage," Elena replied, paying the fare and adding a generous tip. She stood alone on the sidewalk, the afternoon sun hitting her face. She had avoided this moment since her father passed away. 3 months of absence from the funeral, of excuses about canceled flights and work commitments impossible to postpone. Her older brother, Carlos, had handled everything: the burial, the will, the endless paperwork that follows death. But now she was here, finally, because she couldn't escape anymore. The sound of the door opening pulled her from her thoughts. Her mother's figure appeared in the doorway, smaller and more fragile than she remembered. "Elena," Carmela said, her voice barely a whisper. There were no hugs or tears of welcome, just that name spoken like someone finding something lost a long time ago. "Hi, Mom." They entered in silence. The house smelled of cinnamon and lemon, as always. The antique furniture, the family photographs, the paintings of Valencian landscapes her father collected, everything was the same, and yet everything was different without him. "Carlos will be here for dinner," her mother commented as she led her to her old room. "He's been coming over every day since your father left." Elena felt the first twinge of guilt. While she built her career in Buenos Aires, Carlos had stayed in Valencia, taking on responsibilities that should have been shared. Her room remained untouched. The Garcia Marquez books on the shelf, the Spanish film posters, the floral bedspread her grandmother had knitted. It was as if time had stopped waiting for her. "I'll leave you to rest," Carmela said. "Dinner will be at 9. When her mother closed the door, Elena sat on the bed. On the nightstand rested a framed photograph. Her and her father on the Malvarosa beach, both smiling under the Mediterranean sun. She was 16 then, before the argument started, before she decided that being far away was better than confronting what she felt. Night fell quickly. Elena changed out of her travel clothes into a simple blue dress and went downstairs to the dining room where her mother was setting the table. Carmela had always been a woman of few words, but now the silence between them weighed like lead. "I made paella," Carmela finally said. "Your favorite." "Thanks, Mom. Can I help with anything?" "It's all ready." The sound of keys in the door announced Carlos's arrival. He walked in with firm steps, carrying a bag of freshly baked bread. He stopped when he saw Elena, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to do. "Well, look who finally showed up," he said finally. There was no hostility in his voice, but a kind of weariness. Elena walked over and hugged him awkwardly. Carlos returned the embrace, but quickly pulled away. "How was the flight?" he asked, more out of politeness than interest. "Long, but smooth." Dinner was tense. They talked about the weather, about the small changes in the neighborhood, about the neighbors. They carefully avoided any substantial topics: the will, the house, the family import business their father had run for decades. It was Carmela who finally broke the barrier. "The notary is coming tomorrow," she said as she served dessert, homemade flan with caramel. "Your father left specific instructions that must be read with both of you present." Carlos put his spoon down on the plate. "We could have done this 3 months ago." "You know I couldn't come," Elena defended herself. "You always have an excuse, don't you? When Dad got sick, you couldn't come either. When he got worse, you were too busy. And when he died..." Carlos stopped, controlling his tone. "When he died, we barely even talked on the phone." "That's not how it was," Elena insisted, although she knew he was partly right. "You don't understand how things were between us." "And how were they, Elena?" "Because all I saw was a father asking about his daughter until his last day." "Enough." Carmela slammed her hand on the table. "This is not the time for this. Your father wouldn't want his table to be a place of arguments." The rest of dinner passed in silence. Carlos left early, claiming he had work pending at his father's office. Elena helped her mother clean the kitchen. As she dried the dishes, she mustered the courage to ask what she really wanted to know. "Mom, did he ask about me?" Towards the end, Carmela stopped washing and looked at her daughter. Her eyes, the same intense green as Elena's, looked older and more tired. "Every day, until he couldn't speak anymore, he would ask if you had called." Elena felt something break inside her. The tears she had held back for months began to fall. I don't know why I couldn't come. I wanted to, but... Pride, Carmela said softly. Your father and you were too alike. Both so stubborn, so convinced you were right. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat by her bedroom window, looking at the cobblestone streets of Valencia under the lamplight. So many memories, so many unspoken words, so many stored-up resentments. The notary would come tomorrow, and with him, the last will of a man she hadn't been able to say goodbye to. What would her father have written? Forgiveness, reproach, or indifference? Morning would come soon, and with it, a truth that had been waiting 15 years to be revealed. The notary's office, belonging to Javier Mendoza, was exactly as Elena had imagined. Walls covered in legal books, framed diplomas, and a heavy mahogany desk that seemed to have witnessed 1,000 family stories like hers. The three of them sat in silence, Elena on one side, Carlos on the other, and their mother in the center, like a fragile barrier between two opposing forces. Very well, everyone is present. The notary began, a middle-aged man with thin glasses and an impassive expression. I will proceed with the reading of the will of Mr. Antonio Garcia Mendez. He took a sealed envelope from a folder and began to read in a monotone voice the legal terms that preceded her father's wishes. Elena looked out the window towards the Plaza del Ayuntamiento, where tourists strolled, oblivious to the drama unfolding just a few meters away. As for my material assets, the notary read, capturing Elena's attention again, I dispose the following. The family home on Calle Colón will be jointly owned by my children, Carlos and Elena Garcia Sanz, with right of usufruct for my wife, Carmela Sanz Vidal, as long as she lives. Carlos nodded slightly. This was expected, conventional, but the notary continued. The import company Importations Garcia, with all its properties, licenses, and contracts, will pass entirely to the administration of my daughter, Elena Garcia Sanz. A deathly silence fell over the room. Carlos straightened in his chair, his face suddenly pale. Elena felt the air become thick, unbreathable. There must be a mistake, Carlos finally said, his voice trembling with disbelief. I've worked in the company my whole life. Dad was preparing me to succeed him. The notary adjusted his glasses and continued reading, oblivious to the emotional earthquake he had just unleashed. I am aware that this decision will surprise many, especially my son Carlos, who has dedicated years to the family business. However, it is not an act of preference, but of balance. My daughter Elena possesses the international vision and business acumen that the company needs to continue growing in today's global market. Carlos, on the other hand, will receive my collection of real estate properties on the Valencian coast, whose value exceeds that of the company. Elena looked at her brother, expecting to find relief on his face, but she only saw a mask of restraint. I also leave a personal letter for each of my children, which should be read in private, the notary concluded, taking out 2 envelopes of the same color and handing them to Carlos and Elena. The rest of the reading passed in a blur for Elena. Her mind was struggling to process what she had just heard. Why had her father left her the company? She had chosen a completely different path, away from Valencia, away from the family business. Leaving the office, Carlos quickened his pace, clearly wanting to get away as soon as possible. Elena caught up with him on the stairs. Carlos, wait. We need to talk about this. Her brother stopped, but didn't turn to look at her. About what exactly? About how our father handed over my life's work to you while you were too busy to visit him on his deathbed. I didn't ask for this, Elena replied, hurt by the accusation. I'm as surprised as you are. Carlos finally turned around. His eyes, normally warm, looked like 2 points of ice. Really? How convenient, Elena. 15 years absent, and you returned just in time for the inheritance. That's not fair. Elena felt tears welling up. Carlos, I didn't even know Dad was considering this. You can keep the company. I don't want it. I don't need your charity. Carlos's voice echoed on the staircase, causing a secretary to peek her head out from a nearby office. He lowered his tone, but not the intensity. It's not just about the money or the business. It's about Dad thinking that you, who didn't even bother to really get to know the company, were more suitable than me. Do you have any idea what that means? Carmela appeared then, her small figure projecting an invisible authority. That's enough, both of you. This is not the place to discuss family matters. Let's go home. The drive back was tense. Carlos drove in silence. Carmela looked out the window, and Elena clutched the envelope in her lap, afraid of what it might contain. Once home, Carlos announced that he was going back to his apartment. He needed to be alone. Elena watched him leave with a mixture of guilt and frustration. She hadn't asked for any of this. When it was just her and her mother, Elena sat on the living room sofa, emotionally exhausted. "Did you know?" she asked Carmela. "Did you know what Dad had decided?" The woman nodded slowly. "I knew. I tried to make him change his mind, not because I thought he was wrong, but because I knew how Carlos would react." "Why did he do it, Mom? It doesn't make sense." Carmela sat beside her and, for the first time since her arrival, took her daughter's hand in hers. "Your father was a complicated man, Elena, rigid in his convictions, but not blind. He saw in you what you don't see in yourself, the ability to renew what he built. The letter will explain more than I can." Elena looked at the envelope in her hands, her name written in her father's unmistakable hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it and took out a single sheet of paper. "My dearest Elena," she began to read in silence. Her father's words flowed like a long-held river. He spoke of pride in the woman she had become, of regret for not having known how to express his feelings, of how he had followed her career from afar through business contacts. He confessed that her departure had been the hardest blow of his life, but also how he had come to understand that her free spirit needed space to grow. "I leave you the company not as a burden or an obligation," Elena read, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks, "but as a bridge between us, a way for you to return without feeling that you have given in. Carlos has my heart, but you, Elena, have my spirit. Forgive me for not having known how to tell you this while I was alive." Carmela watched in silence, giving her daughter space to process the message from beyond. "It was never about money or property, was it?" Elena asked, carefully folding the letter. "Your father never had a way with words, my dear. He expressed his love through actions, through decisions. This was his way of telling you how much he loved you, how much he believed in you." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years of distance, misunderstandings, and wounded pride. She knew Carlos would be reading his own letter at that moment. What would their father have written to him? Would it be enough to heal the wound that had opened between them? "Do you think Carlos can ever forgive me?" she whispered. "Forgiveness takes time, Elena, and you are not the only one who needs to be forgiven. We all played a part in this story." Outside, night was falling over Valencia. Somewhere in the city, Carlos wrestled with his own demons, his father's letter as his only company. And in that old colonial house, mother and daughter shared for the first time in years the weight and freedom of truth. The main office of Importations Garcia occupied a modernist building in the commercial center of Valencia. Elena had never been there, despite growing up hearing stories about the place. Her father used to describe every corner with pride, from the marble entrance to the terrace overlooking the port where he closed major deals. She paused in front of the glass door with the family logo, a stylized G intertwining the surname with the maritime horizon. She took a deep breath before entering. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s, looked at her with curiosity. "Good morning, can I help you?" "I'm Elena Garcia Sanz." The woman's face instantly transformed, lighting up with recognition. "Miss Elena, of course, how silly of me. I'm Marissa. I've been working with your father since, well, almost forever." Elena smiled, uncomfortable with the enthusiasm. "It's a pleasure, Marissa. I'm here to see the facilities. Of course, Mr. Carlos hasn't arrived yet, but I can show you around in the meantime. I prefer to wait for my brother. Thank you." Elena sat in the reception area, feigning interest in an international trade magazine. She had called Carlos that morning, after 2 days of silence. The conversation had been brief and tense, but at least he had agreed to meet her at the company. 15 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Carlos appeared. He wore an impeccable gray suit, the unofficial uniform of an executive who took his position very seriously. When he saw her, his expression remained neutral, although Elena noticed the tension in his jaw. "Good morning, Elena. Come to my office." She followed him through a labyrinth of corridors where employees looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They all seemed to know who she was, the absent daughter who now, by some twist of fate, had become their boss. Carlos's office was spacious and tidy, with views of the Mediterranean. On the wall behind his desk hung photographs of him with his father at various corporate events, shaking hands, cutting ribbons, celebrating successes. "Have a seat, please," he said, indicating a chair in front of his desk. "I assume you want to talk about the transfer." Elena sat down, but shook her head. "I didn't come for that, Carlos. I came to propose something." She took some documents from her bag and placed them on the desk. "What is this?" he asked, without touching them. "It's an agreement I've drafted. I'm transferring 80% of my shares in the company to you. I'll keep a symbolic stake to respect Dad's wishes, but you'll have absolute control." Carlos looked at the papers as if they might bite him. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's only fair. You've dedicated your life to this place. I didn't even know where the entrance was until today." Her brother leaned back in his chair, studying her with narrowed eyes. "And what do you want in return? The coastal properties?" "I don't want anything, Carlos. Just to fix this." For the first time, she saw a flicker of doubt in her brother's eyes, a small crack in the armor of resentment. "It's not that simple, Elena," he finally said. "Dad's last will was irrational," she interrupted. "He did it for sentimental reasons, not practical ones." Carlos was silent for a moment, playing with a pen between his fingers. Outside, the port of Valencia buzzed with activity under the morning sun. "Did you read his letter?" he finally asked. "Yes. Did you?" "Several times." Carlos opened a drawer and took out the envelope, already worn from repeated readings. "Do you know what he told me? That he always knew I would keep the company alive, but that you could take it places he had never been. That I was his rock, but you were his star." The phrase hit Elena with unexpected force. Her throat tightened, the words caught. "He also asked for my forgiveness," Carlos continued, his voice softer now. "For making me feel that I was only valuable for how much I was like him, for the pressure he put on my shoulders since I was a child." He stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to Elena. "I don't want your shares, Elena. Not like this." "Then what do you want?" "I want to understand why you really left. And don't tell me it was for university or work, because we both know that was just the excuse." The question hung between them, heavy as a stone. Elena looked at the photographs on the wall, all of them showing Carlos as the perfect son, the designated heir. She didn't appear in any of them. "I left because I never felt like I had a place here," she finally said. "You were the son Dad always wanted. Disciplined, traditional, willing to follow in his footsteps. I was complicated. I questioned everything, challenged his ideas. Every conversation ended in an argument." "You were his favorite," Carlos replied, still facing away. "You think I didn't know that? The way he looked at you when you were thinking aloud. How he kept your drawings and report cards. He was so proud of you it hurt to see it." "What are you talking about?" "He always criticized me. Nothing was ever enough." Carlos turned around, a sad smile on his lips. "He pushed you because he saw your potential. He instructed me, guided me step by step, as if he didn't trust me to think for myself." The silence between them took on a new weight, not of hostility, but of revelation. 15 years of misunderstandings began to unravel. "It's not true that you didn't have a place," Carlos added. "Dad talked for years about how the company needed to expand internationally, find new markets. That was the place he was reserving for you." Elena stood up, unable to remain seated. Her mind processed this new reality, so different from the one she had built for years. "Why did he never tell me?" "For the same reason you never told him why you felt uncomfortable here. Pride. The damned Garcia pride." A bitter laugh escaped Elena's lips. "Mom said the same thing." Outside, in the hallway, voices and footsteps could be heard. The company was still functioning, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that office. "I don't want your shares," Carlos repeated, "but I don't want you to leave again either. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe we need both our visions for this to work. What do you propose?" "A real partnership. You handle the international expansion, I'll manage the local operations. Joint decisions on important matters." Elena felt a mixture of fear and hope. "Do you think it would work?" "You don't even know me, Carlos. And I know nothing about the business." Dad believed it would work, and he was rarely wrong about business. For the first time since she had arrived in Valencia, Elena felt something inside her begin to heal, a crack slowly closing. "I'd need time," she said, "to learn, to decide if I really want this. Time is what we have." Carlos extended his hand across the desk. "Deal." Elena took it, feeling the firmness of his grip, so similar to her father's. Deal. That night, as the three of them had dinner at the family home, Carmela watched her children with shining eyes. The tension hadn't completely disappeared, but something had changed. They talked about the company, about the future, cautiously but without hostility. Antonio would be proud, Carmela said softly, raising her glass of wine. Of both of you. Elena looked at her mother, then at her brother, and finally around the house full of memories. She had returned expecting to confront ghosts, close a chapter, and leave again. Instead, she was finding an unexpected beginning. To Dad, she said, raising her glass as well. To Dad, Carlos repeated. Their glasses clinked in the center of the table, silently sealing a promise that went beyond the company, even beyond their father's legacy. It was a promise of rebuilding, of giving a second chance to a family fractured by silence and distance. Outside, Valencia continued its nightlife. Inside, three people who shared blood and wounds began, slowly, to learn the difficult art of healing together. Elena's first few days at Importations Garcia were a mix of confusion and accelerated learning. Carlos had arranged meetings with each department so she could understand the overall operation of the company. From 8 to 6, Elena absorbed information about international contracts, port logistics, and supplier relations, trying to make up for 15 years of absence with marathon days. You're trying to learn everything too fast, Carlos warned her one afternoon, as they reviewed documents in the conference room. Dad took decades to master every aspect of the business. Elena massaged her temples, where a throbbing headache was starting. I don't have decades. The employees look at me like an intruder who has appeared out of nowhere to take everything. They'll get used to it. Most of them have worked here their whole lives and see the company as a family. A family I was never part of, Elena murmured, closing the folder she was studying. Carlos watched her with an expression that wavered between empathy and frustration. The dynamic between them was still fragile, a careful dance of approaching and retreating. There's something we should discuss, Carlos finally said. The Mediterranean International Trade Fair in Barcelona next month. Dad always attended personally. It was a tradition. Elena nodded. She had seen references to that event in several documents. I think we should go together, her brother continued. It would be a good opportunity to introduce you to our most important partners. The proposal surprised Elena. It was the first truly inclusive gesture Carlos had made since her return. Sounds good, she replied, trying not to show too much enthusiasm. Although I don't know if I'll be ready by then. You don't need to be an expert. Just be yourself. The sentence hung between them like an invitation to something deeper than a simple professional collaboration. Elena remembered how inseparable they had been as children before their father's expectations pushed them down divergent paths. That night, she returned to the family home later than usual. She found Carmela in the backyard, tending to her plants in the twilight. It was a ritual Elena remembered from her childhood. Her mother had always found peace among the pots and flowers. Mind if I join you? She asked, approaching. Carmela offered her a small trowel. This lavender needs more space. You can help me replant it. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the sweet scent of the plant mixing with the damp earth. Carlos suggested we go to Barcelona together, to the trade fair. Elena commented as she loosened the soil around the lavender. It's a good start, Carmela replied. Your brother is making an effort. I know, and I appreciate it, but... Elena hesitated, searching for the right words. Sometimes I feel like we're building something new on shaky ground. There are too many things left unsaid between us. Carmela put down her tool and looked directly at her daughter. The golden light of the sunset softened the lines of worry on her face. The only way to strengthen those foundations is by facing what separates you. Not just as business partners, but as siblings. What if we find out we can't be anymore? Siblings, I mean. The bond never disappeared, Elena. It was just buried under pride and pain. Just like these roots, she said, pointing to the plant in her hands. Sometimes they need space to breathe and expand. The following weeks brought a more natural rhythm to the siblings' working relationship. Elena focused on studying the international markets where the company could expand, while Carlos oversaw daily operations. Their areas rarely overlapped, which facilitated a professional coexistence but maintained a personal distance. The turning point came unexpectedly during a business dinner with a potential Japanese client. The representative, Takashi Himura, had traveled to Valencia specifically to meet the Garcia family before signing a significant contract. They dined at El Palmer, a restaurant by the Albufera Lake famous for its authentic Valencian paella. Conversation flowed amicably as the rice cooked in huge paella pans in view of the diners. "Your father was an extraordinary man," Himura commented as he sipped his wine. "I had the honor of meeting him 5 years ago in Tokyo." Carlos nodded with a polite smile. He was a visionary in business. "And a family man," the Japanese added, turning to Elena. He spoke with great pride of his daughter in Buenos Aires. He frequently mentioned how your international perspective would one day complement his son's local knowledge. Elena almost spilled her glass. She looked at Carlos, whose expression remained unperturbed, but whose hands had visibly tensed on the table. "My father had high hopes for the future of the company," she replied diplomatically. The dinner continued, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. When Himura retired to his hotel, promising to sign the contract the next day, the siblings were left alone on the restaurant terrace, the Albufera stretching out before them under the moonlight. "Did you know?" Elena finally asked. "Did you know Dad talked about me like that with clients?" Carlos remained silent for a moment, looking at the silver reflection on the calm waters. "I suspected it. Several times, during business trips, people would ask about you, even though you hadn't set foot in the office once." He paused. "It wasn't easy, you know, being the son who was present while everyone seemed to be waiting for the absent daughter." The confession hit Elena with the force of a revelation. She had always imagined Carlos as the favorite child, the designated heir. It had never occurred to her that he might feel overshadowed by a sister who wasn't even there. "I'm sorry," she said, the words insufficient for the weight of what she was beginning to understand. "I never thought." "You didn't know," Carlos interrupted, his voice softer now. "Just like I didn't know how much the arguments with Dad hurt you. We each lived our own version of the story." The waiter approached to offer them dessert, but both declined. The moment required an intimacy that even the best restaurant couldn't provide. "Shall we take a walk?" Elena suggested. They walked in silence along the edge of the Albufera. In the distance, the lights of the fishing boats flickered like fallen stars on the water. "I remember when Dad used to bring us here as kids," Carlos said. "You always wanted to get on all the boats, and I was afraid of the water." Elena smiled at the memory. "And Dad would let us choose, either both of us on the boat or neither. He never gave in." His lesson on family unity. Typical of him, using a boat ride to teach us values. Both laughed, and for a moment, the weight of the years apart seemed to lighten. "Do you think we could try again?" Elena asked, stopping to look directly at her brother. Not just as partners, but as family. Carlos was silent, but extended his hand towards her. Elena took it, feeling the familiar warmth she had forgotten. "One step at a time," he finally replied. "Starting with Barcelona." Barcelona buzzed with activity for the Mediterranean International Trade Fair. The exhibition center, a huge complex of avant-garde architecture near the port, housed hundreds of stands where companies from all over the Mediterranean basin showcased their products and services. Importations Garcia's stand, in a prime location, stood out for its elegant design that combined tradition and modernity, just as Carlos had insisted. "This event is crucial," Carlos explained as he oversaw the final details before opening. "Not just for the contracts we can sign, but for the relationships we build. Reputation is everything in this business." Elena nodded, nervously adjusting the navy blue suit she had bought specifically for the occasion. She felt like an imposter, about to present herself as co-director of a company she was just beginning to understand. "Relax," Carlos said, noticing her unease. "You'll do fine. How can you be so sure?" "Because you're a Garcia." Her brother patted her on the shoulder, a casual gesture of camaraderie that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "Besides, I saw how you talked to the Brazilian distributors. You've got the instinct." The first day passed in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and preliminary negotiations. Elena watched as Carlos navigated the environment with the confidence of someone in their element. He knew every important person by name, remembered details of conversations from years past, knew exactly when to push and when to yield in a negotiation. "Impressive," she commented during a short break. "You were really born for this." Carlos smiled, but there was something melancholic in his expression. "I wasn't born for this, Elena. I built myself for this. Day after day, year after year, trying to be what Dad expected. The confession, made amidst the bustle of the fair, resonated deeply with Elena. In a way, they had both been prisoners of their father's expectations, she escaping them, he submitting to them. The evening brought the official fair reception, an elegant event at one of Barcelona's most exclusive hotels. Elena found herself immersed in conversations with businessmen from various countries, surprised at how easy it was to be interested in their stories, their markets, their challenges. Her international experience, which she had always considered separate from the family business, now proved to be a valuable asset. It was during one of these conversations that she noticed the presence of Javier Montero, a direct competitor of Importations Garcia and a longtime rival of her father. The man, in his 60s and with an imposing presence, was talking animatedly with a group of French investors at the other end of the room. "Who is that man?" she asked Carlos when she managed to find him in the crowd. "Javier Montero, from Mediterráneo Internacional." Carlos's face hardened. "An old acquaintance. You don't sound very enthusiastic. Let's just say our companies have history. Not all of it pleasant." Before he could elaborate, Montero spotted them and walked towards them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Carlos Garcia, what a surprise to find you so far from Valencia." His tone was cordial but laced with subtle sarcasm. "And this must be the famous Elena, the prodigal daughter who has returned to claim her throne." Elena felt Carlos's immediate tension beside her, but maintained her composure. "Mr. Montero, I've heard of you. It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine. I must confess I was surprised by the news. Antonio was always a traditionalist. I expected him to leave the company entirely in his son's hands." Montero looked directly at Carlos. "Although perhaps he knew you needed help, my boy. Our company is in excellent hands, Javier," Carlos replied with controlled coolness. "Mine and my sister's." Montero chuckled softly. Of course. It will be interesting to see how you manage the new contract with the Nordic markets, now that your father isn't there to guide you. It's treacherous territory." Elena sensed how the mention of that contract hit a sensitive nerve. Carlos visibly tensed. "Everything's under control," her brother replied, although Elena noticed a slight tremor in his voice. "If you'll excuse us, we have other guests to attend to." When Montero walked away, Elena looked questioningly at Carlos. "What Nordic contract?" Carlos drank his glass in one gulp before answering. "A project Dad started shortly before he got sick. An expansion into Sweden and Norway. It is important." "And is there a problem with it?" "Nothing I can't handle," he replied curtly. The brief camaraderie of the previous days seemed to evaporate. "Come on, there are people you should meet." The rest of the night, Carlos avoided any mention of the topic. Elena let it go, aware of the eyes watching them, evaluating their dynamic, looking for signs of weakness in Importations Garcia's new direction. It was only upon returning to the hotel, as Elena was getting ready for bed, that she received a text message from one of the company's administrative assistants, Raul, with whom she had established a good relationship. "Did you know the Nordic contract is in danger? Carlos hasn't shared the problems with anyone, but office rumors say it could fall through. Thought you should know." Elena stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the fragile balance they had begun to build with her brother teetering. Should she confront him? Respect his space? What would their father have done? The answer came with the dawn. Elena woke up determined to address the issue directly, but tactfully. Honesty was the only possible basis for their relationship, both professional and personal. She found him having breakfast alone on the hotel terrace, reviewing documents with a frown and a cup of cold coffee beside him. "Good morning," she greeted him, sitting opposite him. "Can I talk to you about the Nordic contract?" Carlos looked up, surprised. For a moment he seemed about to deny any knowledge, but something in Elena's determined expression made him change his mind. "Who told you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is why you didn't tell me." Carlos closed the folder he was reviewing and sighed deeply. "Because it's my responsibility. My mistake. I oversaw the initial negotiations after Dad got sick, and I underestimated some clauses in the contract. Now the buyers are demanding guarantees we can't provide without a huge investment. And you were planning to fix it alone?" "It's my problem," Carlos insisted, an echo of his father in the stubbornness of his jaw. "I didn't want your first big experience in the company to be dealing with my failure." Elena felt a surge of affection for her brother, mixed with frustration at his stubborn pride. We're not talking about your failure, Carlos. We're talking about the future of the company. Our future. She leaned forward, seeking his gaze. We're partners, remember? In good times and bad. And what do you propose? That you let me see the documents, for starters. For eyes see more than two. And then we'll talk to the Nordic representatives today, together. For a long moment, Carlos didn't reply. Elena could see the internal conflict in his eyes, the desire to protect his pride battling against the practical need for collaboration. All right, he finally said, pushing the folder towards her. But it won't be easy. Montero has already offered them better terms. He'll try to snatch this contract from us like he's tried to snatch others. Elena opened the folder and began to read, while ordering another coffee for both of them. As she went through the documents, an idea began to form in her mind. I think I have a solution, she said after almost an hour of concentrated silence. But I'll need you to trust me. Completely. Carlos looked at her with a mixture of skepticism and hope. I'm listening. And so, under the Barcelona sun, far from their father's shadow, the Garcia siblings began to forge something new. A trust based not on duty or tradition, but on the conscious choice to rely on each other. The flight back to Valencia was silent. Elena looked out the window, watching the clouds intermittently hide the Mediterranean coast. Carlos dozed beside her, the exhaustion of the past 3 days finally taking its toll. The international fair had concluded with unexpected success for Importations Garcia. The strategy Elena had proposed to save the Nordic contract, restructuring the offer to include not only distribution, but also a cultural adaptation program for Spanish products in the Scandinavian market, had worked. The Swedish representatives, initially skeptical, had been impressed by the innovative approach. More significantly, they had beaten Javier Montero at his own game. Their father's old rival had tried to undermine their presentation with malicious technical questions, only to be met with fluent answers from Carlos and strategic perspectives from Elena that complemented each other perfectly. We make a good team, Carlos had commented during the post-celebration, raising his glass to her in a gesture that held both gratitude and respect. Now, as the plane began its descent towards Valencia, Elena reflected on the transformation she had experienced in just 1 month. From absent daughter to business partner, from stranger to sister again, the relationship with Carlos was evolving day by day, built on small moments of trust and mutual understanding. We'll land in 20 minutes, Carlos murmured, waking up and stretching. Tired, exhausted but satisfied, Elena replied with a smile. Do you think Mom will be awake? It's 11 o'clock at night. She's probably waiting for us with hot chocolate and questions about every minute of the fair. Both laughed, recognizing the accuracy of the description. Carmela had adopted an almost maternal role with both of them since Elena's return, as if trying to make up for lost years by nurturing the fragile reconnection between her children. The family home was lit when they arrived, just as Carlos had predicted. Carmela greeted them in a silk robe, with steaming cups of hot chocolate and a tray of freshly baked pestinos. Tell me everything, she asked, sitting with them in the living room. I saw the photos Carlos posted on the company's profile. You both looked very professional. Over the next hour, they recounted the events of the fair, taking turns to share anecdotes, finishing each other's sentences as if they had never been apart. Elena observed the joy on her mother's face, the small wrinkles around her eyes softening with each shared laugh. Your father would be so proud, Carmela finally said, her eyes shining. Of both of you. The mention of Antonio created a brief silence in the room, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of weeks ago, laden with unexpressed resentments. It was a softer silence of recognition. She's right, Carlos conceded, looking at his sister. He'd be proud of how you handled Montero. He always said that man was a shark in murky waters. And of how you stood firm on the technical specifications, Elena added. I didn't understand half of what you were discussing, but you sounded very convincing. Years of practice, Carlos replied with a tired smile. Tomorrow we need to plan the next steps for the Nordic contract. We should get some rest. That night, Elena slept soundly for the first time since her return to Valencia. No dreams, no anxiety that had accompanied her since she set foot in the family home again. The following morning brought the routine that was beginning to feel natural. Early breakfast with her mother, the commute to the office with Carlos, discussing plans and strategies for the day. The company buzzed with new optimism after the success in Barcelona. The employees, initially distant with Elena, now greeted her with genuine respect. It was during the morning meeting when the news arrived that would change everything again. They found irregularities in the accounting records for the past few years, reported Raul, the young administrative assistant who had become Elena's most loyal ally. No one knows exactly what's going on, but the external auditors have been locked away with the financial documentation all morning. Carlos visibly paled. Auditors? I didn't authorize any external audit. Apparently, it was a procedure scheduled by Mr. Antonio before his passing. Raul explained, uncomfortable with the sudden tension in the room. Elena and Carlos exchanged worried glances. Their father had never mentioned such an audit in his will or personal letters. I need to see those documents, Carlos said, getting up abruptly. Right now. The situation became partially clear hours later, when the head of the audit team requested a private meeting with the Garcia siblings. He was a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses and a stern expression. Mr. and Miss Garcia, we have found significant discrepancies in the financial records of the last 3 years of operation under your father's direction, he explained without preamble. Specifically, regular transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands that do not correspond to any documented business operation. Elena felt the ground move beneath her feet. Are you suggesting our father was siphoning funds? I am not suggesting anything, Miss Garcia. I am reporting objective facts. Approximately 2 million euros were transferred in small amounts over 76 months. The final destination of that money is being investigated. Carlos remained deathly silent, his gaze fixed on the preliminary report the auditor had placed on the table. This is impossible, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. My father was the most honest person I've ever known. He personally reviewed every contract, every invoice. The transfers appear to have been authorized with his digital signature. The auditor continued relentlessly. And most concerning, they accelerated in the months before his passing. When the man left, promising a full report in the coming days, the siblings were plunged into an oppressive silence. The office, usually bustling at this hour, seemed a strange and hostile place. It can't be true, Carlos insisted, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of despair. There must be an explanation. Elena examined the copies of the transfers the auditor had left. All small, all seemingly legitimate at first glance, camouflaged as payments to minor suppliers. Carlos, she said slowly, did you know anything about this? The question hung between them like an unintentional accusation. Carlos looked at her with disbelief, then with an anger that reminded Elena of their worst arguments as teenagers. How can you even ask me that? I've been here every single day for 15 years, while you were building your life thousands of miles away. And now you're implying I could have been involved in something illegal. I'm not implying anything. Elena defended herself, although deep down, a doubt had been born. I'm just trying to understand what happened. You said you reviewed the accounts with Dad regularly. The operational accounts, the balance sheets. Not every single damn transfer. Carlos snapped, getting up abruptly. If you want to look for culprits, maybe you should ask yourself why Dad never mentioned this in his famous personal letter to you. Maybe you weren't so special after all. It was a low blow, and they both knew it. Carlos's face immediately showed regret, but the damage was done. The fragile trust built in recent weeks was dangerously teetering. I need some air, Elena murmured, picking up her bag. We'll talk when we're calmer. She walked aimlessly through the streets of Valencia for hours, finally calling a taxi that took her to the Turia Garden, the old riverbed converted into an urban park. She sat on a bench facing the city of arts and sciences, watching the last rays of the sun sparkle off the futuristic structures. Her phone vibrated, a message from Carmela asking if she would be home for dinner. Elena replied vaguely, unable to process the idea of facing Carlos that night. How could they have gone so quickly from celebration to suspicion? The answer came unexpectedly, in the form of a memory. Her father, years ago, talking to her about integrity in business as they walked through this very park. Money is never just money, Elena, he had said. It's materialized trust. Never betray that trust, not even for the best of reasons. At the time, a rebellious teenager, She had dismissed his words as another moralistic sermon. Now they resonated with a new depth. The best of reasons, she murmured to herself. She took out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in weeks, that of her former boss in Buenos Aires, an expert in international finance. Miguel, I need your help tracing the destination of some transfers to the Cayman Islands. She returned home late that night. To her surprise, Carlos was waiting for her in the living room, looking as exhausted as she felt. I'm sorry, he said before she could speak. I shouldn't have said what I said. Elena sat across from him. I'm sorry too, for doubting. But we need to find the truth, Carlos. For Dad, for us, for the company. I agree. Carlos handed her a cup of tea. Any idea where to start? As a matter of fact, yes, Elena replied, feeling a new kind of trust beginning to build between them. I think we need to visit someone Dad used to call his financial conscience. Martinez? But he retired years ago. Exactly. And maybe he's the only one who knows the real purpose of those transfers. Carlos looked at her for a long time, as if evaluating not the idea, but the determination behind it. All right, he finally said. First thing tomorrow. Together. Elena nodded, aware that they faced something bigger than a financial scandal. They faced the very legacy of their father, the truth behind the image they had both built of him. And whatever that truth was, they would have to be strong enough to bear it. Together.